We conclude this week's broadcast of A Wonderful Day in the Lord with Ephesians 6:9. Paul's been talking about relationships and with husband and wife and children and fathers and mothers and slaves, and now he moves to masters. And in verse 9 he says, "And masters, do the same things to them," speaking of how they treat the slaves, "and give up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him." He's spoken to the slaves, and he's told these slaves that they are to serve their masters as they would serve the Lord. They were not to do it superficially. They were not to do it just to get some particular reward from their masters. They were to serve as unto the Lord. And then he moves to masters. He said, "Now, masters, you have an obligation to those who serve under you, those who are your slaves." And he says, "Do the same things to them." So everything he said to the slaves concerning how they are to serve as unto the Lord is also true of the master. So he doesn't repeat it. He simply says, you do the same thing. It's not just for the slaves to serve Christ this way and to serve the work relationship this way. It's also true for the masters, those who are over the slaves. And he says, give up threatening. Of course, in the ancient world, the masters had pretty much absolute control. They could tell the slaves to do whatever they wanted to. The slaves belonged to them and sometimes were a little more than property. And so abuse was very, very common. And one of the ways to get what you want is to threaten the slaves with whatever, maybe possibly a beating or whatever. And so he says, give up that. Don't be like the culture. Don't have a relationship with your slaves like the world has. You're to give up that kind of attitude. Knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven. So again, we're going back to the fact that whether you're a slave, whether you're free, that is just a free person, not a slave or a master, maybe a merchant or a ship captain or whatever, your master is in heaven. So we all have a master. Nobody is their own master. Nobody is their own icon or whatever. We are under someone else. We're under Jesus Christ. He is our master, and he's in heaven. And then he goes on to say, and there is no partiality with him. So the Lord doesn't play favorites. Just because you're wealthy or have power or whatever doesn't impress the Lord at all. He shows no partiality, either to the poor or to the rich, slave or free or the masters. And so this is the overall teaching. What I want to point out before we're done today is how each of these relationships in chapter 6 go back to the Lord. He tells children, for example, to obey your parents in the Lord, for it's right. That's verse 1. And then he talks then to fathers to provoke their children, bring them up in the discipline and the instruction of the Lord. And slaves are to follow their masters, to obey their masters and be great employees because they do it, verse 5, as unto Christ. And in verse 6, they're doing the will of God from the heart. And in verse 7, they're rendering service as to the Lord and not to men. And in verse 8, knowing that whatever good thing each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord. Everything goes back to the Lord. And then in verse 9, where we are now, he says, masters, do the same things to them, and giving up threatening, knowing that both their master and yours is in heaven, and there's no partiality with him. And so masters are to look once again to the Lord, just as the slaves are, just as the parents are, just as the children are. So we're talking about a Christian life, a Christian work relationship, a Christian home relationships, in which everything's wrapped around Christ and how he wants us to live for him. So everything we do with one another ultimately is tethered back to the Lord himself. We do what we do because we are connected and united with Christ. We do it to please him. We do it to honor him. We don't do it just for the rewards. We don't do it just for even the people over us or under us. We do it for Christ and as unto Christ. You know, when that's our attitude, what a change will we be in life. I remember one time hearing about a young lady who was looking at her first job, and she was interviewed by a boss, and the boss said, "Why do you want to work here?" And she said to her potential boss, she said, I want to come here and make you a success. Do you think she was hired? I think she was, because she wasn't teasing. She meant it. She was going to serve as unto the Lord and help her boss be as successful as he could be. What an attitude. We serve Christ in all the relationships that he's given us. So this should give us a wonderful weekend in the Lord as we consider him and our relationships to one another as we are related to Christ himself. You have a blessed weekend.